Hey, my name is Matt Blois. You're listening to Medically Necessary, a podcast about the healthcare supply chain. On the show, I talk with experts, business leaders, and researchers about how we get drugs, devices, and medical supplies to healthcare providers and patients. This podcast is brought to you by Ryder, the only fully integrated logistics and transportation provider in the industry. Ryder's solutions cover the entire supply chain, including warehousing, transportation logistics, e-commerce fulfillment, and last mile. Discover how Ryder can make you ever better at ryder.com. Today, I'm talking with Robert Handfield, a supply chain researcher at North Carolina State University and the director of the Supply Chain Resource Cooperative. Rob has been tracking the effects of the pandemic on the healthcare supply chain for the last year. I wanted to bring him on the show today to talk about the challenge of scaling up global vaccine manufacturing. Before the coronavirus pandemic, the World Health Organization estimated between 3.5 and 5.5 billion doses were purchased last year. In 2021, manufacturers are aiming to produce 14 billion doses. Probably goes without saying, but that is an enormous challenge. The supply chains for vaccine manufacturers are spread all across the globe, and avoiding bottlenecks will likely involve a lot of cooperation. Earlier this month, Rob was part of a summit sponsored by several international public health organizations to start addressing this challenge. So in this episode, we'll talk about proposals to scale up global vaccine manufacturing, how to build more visibility into the vaccine supply chain, and how to get all of those stakeholders to cooperate with each other. Yeah. Okay. Well, Rob, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. It was I've been reading your blog, and I found that to be a really useful resource for kind of tracking a lot of things that's going on with the supply chain during COVID-19. And I wanted to talk to you about, you'd recently been writing about this summit, the C19 Global Supply Chain and Manufacturing Summit. It's something I just read through this morning. There's a discussion document that kind of lays out a lot of the basics of how the COVID-19 manufacturing works right now and some of the potential bottlenecks for COVID-19 supply over the next couple of years. So I think a good place to start is maybe just to get you were part of the summit, and I think a good place to start is just to get a summary of kind of what this summit was and who participated and why it was something useful.
Sure. So this was a global summit that was hosted by a group of organizations that are nonprofits. One of them is BIO, which handles all of the biotechnology, represents all the biotechnology industry. COVAX, which is an initiative to enable distribution of vaccines globally. CEPI, which is also a coalition for epidemic preparedness, and a couple of other organizations that represent the pharmaceutical industry in Europe and in the U.S. And the summit was hosted in such a way using something called Chatham House rules, and the idea is, behind the Chatham House rules, if anyone's been part of that, is you're not able to really disclose who says what. You have to kind of keep it within the room, if you will. And the goal was how do we talk about what's going on in terms of production capacity and challenges in vaccine production and distribution globally.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that certainly seems like a worthwhile challenge to be talking about right now, and something I think a lot of people need to be working together on. So I guess the big question is, I mean, just in general, what were some of the recommendations that summit participants came up with during this summit? What were some of the big things that all these stakeholders thought what are the right things to tackle?
Well, we heard from a lot of different people. We heard from, they had the CEOs of all the major vaccine manufacturers, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer were all there. And they were talking about the fact that, they had rapidly escalated the production of their vaccines, but that many of the challenges were occurring because of upstream supplies of the vaccine. So specifically things like the filter bags, the single-use bioreactor bags, the disposable tubing. Those were some examples of some of the things that they had shortages of. And it became apparent that there were also Other roadblocks or problems, some of them related to import-export restrictions on the part of different governments, getting stuff across borders, and also a lack of standardization around the rules, import-export rules, and distribution rules as well. So there were really a multiplicity of different problems, and everyone was talking about all these problems. Unfortunately, not a lot of people are talking about solutions, and that's where we're hopefully able to add something there.
Yeah, although it feels like even at this point, I think getting a good sense of what the problems are is maybe a first step towards figuring out what the solutions are. And so it sounds like at least there's some collaboration in terms of figuring out what the baseline is and what are the potential problems. Well, and so, you mentioned that there weren't a lot of solutions that people came up with, but I mean, were the participants able to identify, specific parts of the supply chain that would make the most sense to invest in? I mean, you mentioned, there's some different sections here. There's the upstream part, there's sort of the inputs, everything that goes into the vaccine, there's the process of making the vaccine, and I think maybe you could add sort of the process of getting the vaccine from a manufacturer to a patient. So I mean, which parts of that process need the most investment?
Well, I think this goes back to what I said earlier. A lot of the manufacturers of the vaccines themselves, Pfizer, J&J, received a lot of government funding, and they were able to expand their production. And many of them were able to also come up with some innovative ways to improve that. So, normally development of a vaccine and production takes place over 5 to 10 years. And over that process, there's a lot of productivity improvements that companies come up with. Well, in the span of 1 year, they started producing. There's still a lot of opportunity for productivity improvements, so they haven't really looked at all of those, but they're rapidly improving that. But they're also looking at other things, like Pfizer discovered that they could get 6 doses out of a vial instead of 5 with a special needle. So that actually, that's, if you think about it, that's a 20% increase in capacity. Moderna also discovered they could get more doses up into a vial. So one of the bottlenecks was glass vials. So if they could get more doses in the same vials, then again they could increase their throughput and their production capacity as well. But they also noted that there were, like I said, for the upstream suppliers, excipients, consumables, bioreactor bags. These were things that were in short supply before COVID. Right, and if you think about it, before COVID, there was about 5 billion doses per year that the vaccine manufacturers were producing. They need to get to about 12 billion this year. So that's going from 5 billion to 12 billion in 1 year. The industry just wasn't designed to build that many vaccines. So it's a problem.
Yeah, well, and also given the fact that some of these vaccines, the Moderna one and the Pfizer one, are built on this mRNA technology, which is pretty new, and so that's there's less of that existing capacity just out there in the world waiting to be used. So that feels like adds to the challenge too. So you mentioned, a lot of these companies have gotten a ton of government investment to help scale up their manufacturing capacity. And I know over the last year, I think those of us in the United States have been hearing a lot about Operation Warp Speed, or I guess what was formerly known as Operation Warp Speed. And just, a ton of money was pumped into these companies to pump up their capacity. And I've been reading a couple, I read an essay not too long ago from Chad Brown. He's at the Peterson Institute of International Economics, and Thomas, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his name, Boliki. Hopefully that's correct. But yeah, but they were making this argument for, what we need to do now is we really need to do this. We need to do the same sort of thing, do an Operation Warp Speed, but make it global, and really, rather than being focused on the United States, look at how can we bring this to the world? How can we scale up manufacturing in different parts of the world and make sure that these doses get everywhere? And I was interested, after going to this summit, like what do you make of that idea of an Operation Warp Speed for the world, and what would that look like, or what would we need to make that happen?
No, I really believe that we need to be thinking more about a collective future. And, it's one thing to say, well, we've put the DPA in place, and therefore the U.S. is going to be vaccinated. And I think that's been part of the Biden administration's, they claim that they would get the 100 vaccines in 100 days, et cetera. But the fact is, the vaccine we should be viewing it more as a utility. And if we don't get the vaccine out to every country in the world, we're going to get more variants, and the vaccines that we're being exposed to aren't going to be effective, and this problem will continue to escalate. And so, when one country is exposed to the virus, we're all exposed. So we have to really think collectively about how to bring vaccines to the world. We face, extraordinary problems to be able to produce more than 14.5 billion vaccines per year in a supply chain that was designed to produce no more than 5. One of the things that I think is an issue is we need, anyone who understands supply chains is you need data, right? You need data to understand what's going on. So what we're proposing is that we have better information in the form of some type of a control tower that would be adjudicated by the World Trade Organization, CEPI, and maybe the ICC, where there's firewalls that people can see kind of where they are overall relative to others, but that they can also figure out where supplies can be found, and perhaps think about how to best allocate supply to those countries or regions that most need the vaccines, where they're having outbreaks. I spoke to someone in Brazil who told me that they have manufacturing capacity in Brazil to manufacture it. They don't have supplies. So they need these filter bags and other supplies. They can be self-sufficient, but they need that. Other places, other continents like Africa don't have anything. They've vaccinated less than 1% of their population. And so, we really have to help these countries, or their vaccines they're not going to get vaccinated, and we're going to get more variants. One of the problems I also see is with warp speed is, we were kind of in a let's roll kind of mentality. They negotiated these contracts with the manufacturers. They didn't require them to share their IP. And I think that, looking back, that maybe was a mistake, that perhaps they should have had some conditions in there that would have allowed, licensing of that IP to other manufacturers rather than, holding it to themselves.
Yeah. Well, and that seems like, so, I mean, just to make sure I'm kind of understanding exactly what you're saying here. I mean, it sounds like one of the things you're saying that would really help is getting more visibility into the supply chain, understanding, like you said, okay, this place has, their manufacturing capacity is maxed out, but, they've got some extra bioreactor bags that they might be able to send somewhere else. Like you were saying in Brazil, they have the capacity, but they don't have the supplies. But the only way you can do that is if everybody kind of comes to the table and says, okay, here's what we've got, we've got these resources, we need these resources, and other people saying that same thing, and sort of getting both companies and governments to work together to cooperate and share those resources, because it feels like it's in everyone's mutual interest to, really get as many vaccines produced as possible. But you already started talking about this a little bit. I mean, it seems a lot of the companies that are doing it, these are private companies, they're for-profit companies. They want to protect, their bottom line. They want to protect their processes and their intellectual property. So, how do you get private companies like this to share information, or how do you convince them that it's in their best interest to do it when they're trying to make a profit?
Well, that's a great point, Matt. And I think, I agree with you 100% that, I'm a big fan of Adam Smith and the free market, right? And we have to think along those terms, because that's the only thing that works. So we have to be able to create contractual incentives for firms to participate. And one of those would be, there's value in these organizations just to be able to gain market intelligence themselves, right? Today, they don't have any information on the market. They don't know what's going on out there. It's all kind of word of mouth. So, at least if we could provide them with access to intelligence where, you wouldn't know that your competitor has more or less capacity than you, but you would know where you rank out of, N providers in terms of capacity, inventory, and production throughput. And that would be valuable. The other thing is, I think we could allow allocation of demand to suppliers and manufacturers that do have excess capacity. That there could be this adjudicator that would, pass on demand to those parties and can play a role in that. And I think also, the third parties like the WTO could play a role in secure financing to expand capacity in these areas, to help secure financing. And then finally, I think, there could be, what we're proposing is there could be some kind of system of set-aside orders where they get priority on future demand, because we know this COVID vaccine is going to be required for years to come. But going forward, maybe they get a price premium, on future market demand if they're participating today. So we need to be thinking creatively about how to create contractual incentives to get people to participate in this.
Yeah, that feels like an important piece of the puzzle, and it'll be interesting to see what people come up with. So I'm also just interested. I think you've been tracking this whole topic pretty closely for since the pandemic began, and I think you just had a chance to be a part of the summit. How hopeful do you feel about the ability to scale up vaccine manufacturing to where it needs to be? I mean, we've managed to make this vaccine really, really fast. That feels really good. But can we pull off the same feat or the same sort of level of feat when it comes to this supply chain and producing enough vaccines and getting them out there to people?
Well, I think right now it is kind of a free for all. I'll be honest. I think it's very disorganized, and no one's really taking the lead. I'm hopeful. I've been in some conversations this week with some people that have relationships with the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization has a new leader, Nadezi, she's very proactive on this. And we think that she can take a lead in helping to drive this forward if we can convince people that this is a good thing. There's still a lot of people that are not comfortable with the idea of a kind of a third-party adjudicator managing this thing. But I believe it's required, and hopefully we'll get there, with the right parties in the room.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think those are the main questions that I was hoping to talk to you about. I felt like this was a super helpful conversation for me to understand kind of where we are and what the future looks like in terms of scaling up vaccine manufacturing on a global scale. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Just anything that we didn't get to, or any other points that you felt were important to talk about when it comes to this topic?
Well, no, I'll just add, I got my second Pfizer vaccine over the weekend, so I'm pretty thrilled about that. And I'm just hopeful that everyone can go out and get a vaccine. I think the last issue I think is important is these vaccine declination rates. And we're still seeing that, even in healthcare providers, even low-income countries. You have people that are worried about even getting vaccinated. So that's still a barrier that I think we all need to overcome as well. Is once we get the majority of people vaccinated, how do we get that last group vaccinated as well?
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for talking with me today. This was super helpful. I just really appreciate you coming on and giving us a little bit of your insight. So thanks so much.
My pleasure, Matt. Thanks.